Hey guys, welcome back to another mechanics discussion video. Last episode we talked about healing in League of Legends and my original plan was to go straight into shields, but I thought this would be a more interesting topic to go over first, and similarly to healing, it's been increasing in frequency from new release to new release. Today we'll be discussing mobility in League of Legends. I'm guessing all of you have been waiting to hear about this one. But I do feel the need to establish a few things before we get started. I said this in the previous 3 episodes, but it's especially important to talk about for this one. The concept of mobility is not what everyone is complaining about when they say there's too much of it in the game. At least for me, they're probably referring to the issue that it seems every champion has it whether or not it's actually necessary for them. And since it comes in all different forms and features, I thought it wise to clear that up first. Just like the previous episodes, I'll be starting first by explaining the mechanic to the best of my ability, then I'll start by thinking all of the legitimate points in favor of it and then segue into the points against it, finally giving my conclusion at the end. So let's get started. While they may sound the same, there are 2 different forms of movement in League of Legends. The first is tempo, a champion's normal rate of travel, such as walking from top lane to mid lane or junglers walking throughout the jungle. When I say tempo, I usually refer to one's ability to traverse the map while out of combat, so champions that build Mobi boosts like supports would have very good tempo, or someone like Talon who can parkour over walls is someone with good tempo. Mobility is a champion's movement in combat, how fast they can run around and stuff while in the heat of battle. This can take the form of champions who gain a large boost of movement speed in combat such as Singed and Lilia, or those with dashes and blinks like Katarina, Zed, and Yasuo. This does also apply to items and external sources. The runes Water Walking and Celerity apply primarily towards tempo, while Nimbus Cloak and Approach Velocity are mobility runes. Hextech, Rocket Belt, Prowler's Claw, and Gale Force are also mobility items. With that said, in terms of the discussion part, I'll probably stick to just champion mobility like dashes and blinks, as that's the part that draws the most heat from the community anyway. Mobility has been around for a very long time. Things like dashes and blinks aren't new concepts to League of Legends. However, the rate at which new champions have been given access to it has increased tremendously if we compare the first half of the game's lifespan to the latter half leading up until now. If we take the first 40 champions in the game, even after their reworks, only 15 of them have any form of mobility, but that number drops to 11 if we factor out those who only have it in their ultimates, since you can only use those every Tuesday. Flip it around to the 40 most recent champions, and that number goes all the way up to 33. In fact, just to save my editor time, I'll have him put on screen the champions who don't have mobility. Aside from these guys, everyone has a dash or blink or huge boost of movement speed. We went from 1 in every 4 champions to almost every champion getting something that makes them move faster in fights, though the intensity and number varies between each of them. Obviously, Alawi's Harsh Lesson is less significant than Camille's Hookshot. Anyway, if you've been playing League for the past couple seasons, or if you've been watching my videos for a while, you'll know that just like healing, people are getting annoyed with how every champion comes with a billion dashes that reset on kill, and everyone zooming around the map at lightning speed that it feels like being a ranged champion just doesn't matter anymore. Whether good or bad for the game, one thing is undeniable, the game has gotten faster, much faster. Now let's find out what kinds of points I can come up with both for and against mobility, starting with the former. In other games, the ability to avoid damage by sidestepping, blocking, or spacing away from enemy attacks is sort of taken for granted. In first-person shooter games, you can dodge enemy fire by hiding behind terrain, or strafing, shifting your position back and forth, left and right due to bullets having very small hitboxes. Fighting games like Smash Bros grant you multiple options: rolling, spot dodging, and shielding. In the air, players can jump above an attack or issue an air dodge command, giving every character homogeneous access to defensive tools irrespective of their own abilities and skills. As we know in League, attacks can cover a much wider range, especially short-range ones with enormous hitboxes, Mordekaiser's Obliterate or Annie's Incinerate to name a few. Player movement, on the other hand, is marginally limited to balance out the position and location-centric gameplay in MOBA titles. In most circumstances, if you're right in the middle of where an attack is going to land, you can't just walk out of it on base movement speed alone. Dashes and blinks serve as a way for players to do just that, dodge attacks that are otherwise impossible to walk out of, and it allows them to cross terrain to either put some distance between them and pursuers, or to chase after opponents who are over the wall. If there were no forms of mobility like flash or dashes and such, it would make the game far less skill expressive since everyone would essentially become juggernauts walking towards each other, and whichever person hit harder would win. It gives champions accessibility. The main reason shields and dodges were put in place in Smash was to give even short-range fighters a way to protect themselves while they approach long-range zoners and vice versa, a way for zoners to mitigate and escape pressure from short-range attackers since the latter usually has way better frame data, speed, and combos. It's no different in League. The reason melee champions have access to dashes is so that they have a way to get close to ranged champions like AD carries and mages, and the reason ranged champions have access to dashes is to give them the space they need to attack without fear of being torn to shreds. For example, marksmen like Ezreal and Lucian have no crowd control and take a bit of time to put in their DPS, so their mobility spell plays a vital role in giving them enough wiggle room to do their job. Renekton's 2 dashes are necessary to get him into the middle of the enemy team where he can blow everyone up. Mobility is also necessary for so many champions to have the playstyles that they do. Divers, assassins, and skirmishers rely on their fast rushdown and/or superior speed to quickly overwhelm opponents because their element of surprise and evasion are where much of their pressure comes into play. They wouldn't be that frightening if they came at you at a snail's pace. Some champions have only their dashes and blinks to protect themselves. Speaking of combat, there are countless ways to stop mobility dead in its tracks, no pun intended. Some champions come equipped with tools specifically designed to counter dashes like Poppy, Singed, Cassiopeia, and their respective abilities. Displacement and crowd control like knockups can also intercept dashes, such as Thresh using Flay to catch Tristana mid-jump, or Gragas body slamming Zac in the air. Additionally, since you can't use movement abilities while rooted, you actually get screwed over by things like Lux or Morgana Q more than other champions. Even though Riven's Broken Wings is a damaging ability, she can't physically use them while rooted. Yes, I know the whole just CC them doesn't really count as counterplay considering everyone gets countered by crowd control, but it is a point to mention. Mobility also facilitates faster response time. Map rotations are much less risky to do now since lots of champions have dashes or ways to traverse the jungle very freely, not to mention the inclusion of blast cones to jump over walls. This means players now have the liberty to roam to other lanes and help their teammates out without giving too much on their end, and it can allow for more options and strategies to be put in place now that both teams have to account for the higher number of angles they can be attacked from, as opposed to only from the river. Essentially, it challenges players to stay on their toes and keeps the game fresh and interesting. That's about all I could think of when it came to the positive aspects of increased mobility. Now let's look into the negative aspects of its growing prevalence. Since League of Legends is a game about tempo and positioning, mobility ranks among the most valuable offensive and defensive asset a champion could have, giving them a massive situational advantage over those who don't have any. Mobility entails a huge expansion of possibilities, which means said champion can handle many more situations. Juggernauts are less popular than divers because while they're more brutal in strength and resilience, they're not as versatile simply because they can't move very fast. You can easily escape a Darius or Mordekaiser by jumping over the wall. Conversely, you can easily catch up to them with a dash, provided they don't have flash of course. Mobility is just too good as a combat mechanic because of this. Speed differences exist in other games, but in League, speed in and of itself can be a defensive tool as much as it can be offensive. Assassins are notorious for this. They can easily rush in, dispatch a priority target, and get out within seconds. Even if you have cat-like reflexes, your character is physically unable to respond to their fast movement, so the opportunity of a counterattack may not even exist. Skill shots become trivial to dodge since all you have to do is wait for them to be thrown out and then you press your dash ability. You don't have to practice fancy footwork when you have a button that moves you from one location to another in the blink of an eye. Back in my One Tricks video, did you notice anything in particular that is shared among all popular champions? They're fast. Yasuo, Zed, Lee Sin, Riven, Katarina, Kassadin. All of these champions have incredible mobility, and just by having so much of it, they can circumvent a lot of attacks and abilities without much difficulty. The only reason Riven and Irelia are near impossible matchups for Aatrox is because all of his abilities are position dependent, and these champions can change that instantly multiple times. Subsequently, any champion with position-based attacks like Victor, Aurelion Sol, and Zyra have completely fallen out of favor through no fault of their own, despite being very strong mages with a lot to offer. While they do have their own weaknesses, the most pressing reason for their low play rate is because it's just way too easy to beat them since many champions can chase them down and dodge their attacks, placing those with slow abilities and poor mobility at a game-breaking disadvantage. I understand one of the points I made in favor of mobility is that it creates skill expression for a champion. It does, but only against an opponent with comparable speed and movement. For Kassadin against a slow-paced fighter like Alawi, mobility isn't skill expression. In fact, it removes skill expression since he simply has to save his Rift Walk to dodge tentacles and nothing else. Now, if we consider perhaps Yasuo versus Zed, then yes, that's where the skill expression comes into play. Both players have equal opportunities to avoid each other's attacks. In other words, mobility is too valuable for how easy it is to use, especially when you take into consideration the fact that it's not granted to every champion, and there are no limitations or lines in the sand as to which ones can get them. Pokemon is a turn-based game, where whichever Pokemon has a higher speed stat can attack first. To balance this out, Fast Pokemon are usually glass cannons, meaning they can't take much punishment before going down. Take Deoxys for example. His normal form has a monumental 150 base speed, attack, and special attack, allowing him to strike hard and fast. In exchange, he has very low base HP, defense, and special defense, so if he fails to kill the target with his initial engage, he's gonna get bursted himself. Contrarily, if we look at Snorlax, this motherfucker can't move his ass even if his life depended on it, but to supplement that, he has incredible base health and special defense. More often than not, he'll be attacked first, but he can easily survive those attacks before delivering a heavy punch right back at his opponent. League of Legends doesn't have any form of equivalent exchange for mobility. I know most of you are privy to the triangle of engage versus sustain versus poke, but there's a second triangle that also determines how champions are handled: range, mobility, and durability. Juggernauts have poor range and mobility, so to compensate they have high durability. Mages are slow and squishy, so to compensate they have very high range. But there's just one problem. Mobility can also count as range. By now I sound like a broken record when I say assassins, skirmishers, and divers are the most popular champion subclasses, but that's because they have the highest combination of mobility, durability, and range. When you're good in all three categories, it becomes painfully obvious as to why they're considered unfair by the community. With how many dashes Irelia has, or how fast Hecarim can run you down, can you really say they have low range due to their melee status? Yone can assassinate you from 5 screens away, but he's a melee champion, so he's short-ranged. You're starting to see an issue here, right? Engage beats sustain, sustain beats poke, and poke beats engage. There's a clear-cut win and loss for each method, but mobility can beat out both ranged and durability. It can close the gap between them and ranged champions, and it can kite out durable ones who are usually too slow to keep up both in attacks and movement. I'll say it again. Mobility is one of, if not the most valuable combat asset to have in League of Legends. Judging by the length of each segment, you're probably gonna assume I'm on the side of increased mobility being a bad thing. You are correct, in my own personal bias. I don't like how every champion has a billion dashes and resets in every single one, and I miss the days where Lucian and Ezreal's mobility was a special thing since every marksman aside from those two had no dashes. But then they went ahead and added Samira, Kai'Sa, and Akshan, who make me question if they're even marksmen in the first place. But, and this is a big but, that came out wrong. Objectively speaking, the mobility creep in League is neither good nor bad. I'm not fence-sitting, hear me out. Unlike stealth and untargetability, which straight up neutralize certain enemy champions, mobility isn't quite a hard counter to anything really. I did say that against position-based champions like Victor, the higher number of dashes and such make his damage inconsistent, but not completely useless. AD carries get gap closed on from 3 screens away, but by and large that mobility doesn't insta-kill them. Aatrox may get destroyed by Riven, Irelia, and Fiora, but he still has a chance to beat them if they miss position. For Irelia, Hecarim, and Yone, it's not necessarily their mobility that makes them super stupid to deal with for ranged champions, it's their ability to burst you 100 to 0 by landing one attack which lets them chain every other attack. But it is still possible for AD carries to outplay them by sidestepping or kiting backwards, since they are still vulnerable to attack. Am I saying what Yone can do is perfectly balanced? Not in the slightest. That being said, I would much rather fight him than Akali or Gwen because at least I can hit him back, whereas those two I can't even click on them. Basically, mobility is oversaturated in League of Legends, but there are much worse mechanics out there. And besides, most champions have a mild case of it. Again, Viego's Spectral Maw Dash isn't the same as Katarina's Shunpo, much shorter in range and doesn't reset upon kill. Akshan's Heroic Swing is obnoxious, while Kindred's Dance of Arrows is fine. It's a case-by-case basis. But what do you guys think? Do you think the community is overreacting when it comes to mobility in the game, or do you agree with them that every champion is just too fast now? Let me know in the comments down below. So if you enjoyed the video, a rating would be much appreciated. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Consider following me on my socials and joining my Discord server, and lastly, check out my previous mechanic discussions if you haven't yet. But for now, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for the next one. Take care.